The gunshot that shattered the window of the general store in Shoshone City, Idaho wasn't meant for Grace Zimmerman, but it changed her life all the same. She dropped behind the counter, her heart hammering against her ribs as shards of glass rained down around her like deadly snow. It was August 1882, and the high desert sun beat mercilessly through the now empty window frame as angry voices shouted in the street outside. Grace pressed her palms against the rough wooden floorboards, counting her breaths the way her late father had taught her during their years traveling the frontier. 1, 2, 3. By the time she reached 10, the shooting had stopped, replaced by the thunder of hooves retreating into the distance. "Miss Zimmerman, you hurt?" The voice belonged to Sheriff Morrison, his weathered face appearing above the counter moments later. He extended a calloused hand to help her up, his expression grim beneath his salt and pepper mustache. "I'm fine." Grace brushed dust and glass from her simple cotton dress, her hands surprisingly steady despite the racing of her pulse. At 23, she had seen enough of the West's violence to know that showing fear only invited more trouble. She had learned that lesson the hard way 3 years ago, when cholera had taken both her parents during a wagon journey to California. She had survived by being practical, by keeping her head down, by not drawing attention. What was that about? The Dalton boys, causing trouble again. They're getting bolder. Morrison's jaw tightened as he surveyed the damage. "I'm going to need to round up a posse, but I wanted to make sure you were safe first." Grace nodded, already calculating the cost of replacing the window. She had been managing the general store for old Mr. Henderson for nearly 2 years now, ever since she had arrived in Shoshone City with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate need for work. The old man had taken pity on her, given her both employment and a small room in the back of the store. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and she protected it fiercely. The rest of the day passed in a blur of sweeping glass and boarding up the window. Customers came and went, each with their own theories about the Dalton gang and their increasingly brazen robberies. Grace listened with half an ear as she worked, her mind already worrying about tomorrow's problems. The store's profits had been thin lately, and Mr. Henderson's health was failing. She knew it was only a matter of time before he would have to sell, and then, where would she be? She was securing the last board over the window frame when she heard boots on the wooden planks of the sidewalk. Grace turned to find a man standing in the doorway, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of aged whiskey. He wore the dust of hard travel on his clothes, and a well-maintained Colt revolver rested on his hip. Something about the way he carried himself spoke of competence and danger in equal measure. "Store's closing soon," Grace said, wiping her hands on her apron. She was used to drifters and cowboys passing through Shoshone City. Most were harmless, looking for supplies or a hot meal before moving on. But this man was different somehow, and she couldn't quite put her finger on why. "I'm looking for work, actually." His voice was deep and steady, with a slight drawl that suggested Texas origins. "Name's Garrett Whitmore. Sheriff Morrison said Mr. Henderson might be hiring ranch hands." Grace shook her head, feeling a strange flutter in her stomach that she immediately dismissed as hunger. She hadn't eaten since breakfast. "Mr. Henderson doesn't run a ranch anymore. He sold his cattle operation 5 years ago when his wife passed. This store is all he has left." Garrett's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those amber eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or resignation. "I see. Thank you for your time, madam." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that seemed oddly old-fashioned even for the frontier, and turned to leave. "Wait." The word escaped before Grace could stop it. She bit her lip, wondering what possessed her to speak. Getting involved with strangers was exactly the kind of trouble she had spent 3 years avoiding. "There's a ranch about 10 miles north of here, the Broken Arrow. Owner's name is Hutchinson. He might be hiring." Garrett turned back, and when he smiled, it transformed his entire face. "I appreciate that, Miss Zimmerman, Grace Zimmerman." She didn't offer her hand. Physical contact seemed dangerous somehow, as if touching this stranger might somehow alter the careful, controlled life she had built for herself. "Well, Miss Zimmerman, I'm grateful for the information." He paused, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "That window trouble from earlier. The Dalton gang shot it out during a disagreement with some locals." Grace kept her voice neutral, factual. "It happens. Shouldn't happen to you, though." There was something fierce in the way he said it, protective in a way that made Grace's defenses rise immediately. I can take care of myself, Mr. Whitmore. I've been doing it for a long time. I don't doubt it. He settled his hat more firmly on his head. I'll be at the boarding house if that job at the Broken Arrow works out, just in case you need anything. After he left, Grace stood in the empty store, listening to the evening sounds of Shoshone City settling down for the night. The distant lowing of cattle, the laughter from the saloon 3 doors down, the creak of wagon wheels on packed earth. She told herself the strange feeling in her chest was just leftover anxiety from the shooting. Nothing more. Getting tangled up with a drifting cowboy was the last thing she needed. That night, she lay in her small room behind the store, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about amber eyes and a voice that made promises it had no business making. She had learned long ago that depending on anyone else was a fool's game. People left. People died. The only person she could truly rely on was herself. 3 days passed before she saw Garrett Whitmore again. Grace had almost convinced herself that he had moved on, that he had been just another face in the endless stream of wanderers who passed through Shoshone City. But on Thursday morning, as she was arranging cans of peaches on the store's shelves, the door opened and there he was. "Morning, Miss Zimmerman." He carried his hat in his hands, and his dark hair was damp, as if he had just washed. "I got that job at the Broken Arrow. Hutchinson's a fair man, pays decent wages." "That's good." Grace focused on aligning the cans in perfect rows, using the task to avoid looking directly at him. "Was there something you needed from the store?" "Actually, I was wondering if you might need some help." Garrett gestured toward the boarded-up window. "I'm handy with carpentry. Could fix that properly, install new glass, make it good as new." Grace straightened, finally meeting his eyes. "I can't afford to pay you, Mr. Whitmore. The store's finances are tight as it is." "Didn't ask for payment." He said it simply, as if offering free labor to strangers was the most natural thing in the world. "Consider it a thank you for pointing me toward good work." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "I don't accept charity. Mr. Whitmore, I pay my own way." Something flickered across his face, hurt maybe, or confusion. "It's not charity, Miss Zimmerman. It's neighborly." "I'm not your neighbor. I'm not your responsibility. I'm nothing to you." Grace heard the harshness in her own voice and hated it, but she couldn't seem to stop. Years of protecting herself had built walls too high to easily scale. "I appreciate the offer, but no." Garrett stood there for a long moment, studying her with those two-seeing eyes. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, but the offer stands, if you change your mind." He settled his hat back on his head. "I'll be coming by once a week for supplies for the ranch. I hope that won't trouble you." "Why would it trouble me?" Grace turned back to her cans, dismissing him with a gesture. "This is a store. Selling supplies is what I do." After he left, she found herself gripping a can of peaches so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. She forced herself to relax, to breathe, to remember why she had rules about staying distant. It was safer this way. Safer for everyone. But Garrett Whitmore, it seemed, was not a man easily discouraged. True to his word, he came to the store every week. Always polite, always friendly, never pushing, but never quite giving up either. He would buy flour and coffee and beans, sometimes tobacco or ammunition, and he would make small talk about the weather, or the ranch, or the latest news from the territorial capital. Grace responded with the bare minimum, keeping her answers short and her demeanor cool. "You're harder to crack than a walnut in winter," he said one day in September, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I'm not trying to be cracked, Mr. Whitmore." Grace wrapped his purchases in brown paper, her movements efficient and practiced. "I'm simply doing my job. Can't fault you for that." He counted out coins from a leather pouch, placing them on the counter with care. "Though I can't help but wonder what made you so determined to keep the world at arm's length." Grace's hands stilled. She looked up at him, really looked, and saw nothing but genuine curiosity in his expression. No judgment, no mockery, just honest interest. It unnerved her more than hostility would have. "That's none of your concern. Fair enough?" He gathered his packages, but before he left, he paused at the door. "You know, Miss Zimmerman, I've been thinking there's going to be a church social next Saturday. Dancing and food, nothing fancy. Thought you might like to go." "No, thank you." The answer was automatic, reflexive. "Can I ask why not?" Grace hesitated, torn between her instinct to shut him down and a strange compulsion to be honest. "Because I don't dance, Mr. Whitmore. I don't socialize. I work and I survive, and that's enough. That's not living, though. He said it gently, without accusation. That's just existing. Maybe existing is all I want. She crossed her arms, a defensive gesture she immediately regretted because it revealed too much. Not everyone needs romance and excitement, Mr. Whitmore. Some of us are content with simpler things. I wasn't offering romance, Garrett said, though something in his eyes suggested otherwise. Just friendship. But I understand if even that's too much trouble. After he left, Grace found herself staring at the door for a long time. Too much trouble. The words echoed in her mind, and she realized with sudden clarity that was exactly what she was afraid of. That letting someone in, even just a little, would lead to complications she couldn't afford. Emotional entanglements that would distract her from the careful balance she had achieved. She had survived this long by being self-sufficient, by not needing anyone. Changing that now seemed not just foolish, but dangerous. October brought cooler temperatures and the first hints of the harsh winter to come. The cottonwoods along the creek turned gold, and the mountains in the distance began to wear caps of white. Grace ordered extra supplies for the store, knowing that once the heavy snows came, deliveries would be sporadic at best. She worked long hours, taking inventory and planning, losing herself in the familiar rhythms of commerce. Mr. Henderson's health continued to decline. He came to the store less and less frequently, leaving Grace to manage almost everything. She didn't mind. The work kept her busy, kept her from thinking too much about amber eyes and gentle questions that probed at her carefully constructed defenses. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon, cold and gray, when 3 men walked into the store. Grace recognized them immediately as trouble. They had the hard, weathered look of men who lived outside the law, and the way they spread out as they entered suggested coordination and intent. The leader was a thin man, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw, and when he smiled, it held no warmth whatsoever. "Afternoon, miss." His voice was rough, like gravel scraped across wood. "We're looking for supplies, lots of them." Grace kept her expression neutral, though her heart had begun to race. "I'm happy to sell you whatever you need, gentlemen. What are you looking for? Food, ammunition, whiskey?" The scarred man approached the counter, his 2 companions fanning out to block the exits. "And we'll need it loaded up quick. We're in a hurry." "Of course." Grace began gathering items, moving with deliberate calm. She had dealt with dangerous men before. The key was to give them no reason to escalate, to be useful and forgettable. "Will you be paying cash?" The scarred man laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "That's real cute, sweetheart. No, we won't be paying. We'll be taking." Grace's hands tightened on the can of beans she was holding, but she kept her voice level. "This store belongs to Mr. Henderson. It's all he has. If you take from him, you'll be destroying an old man's livelihood." "Not my problem." The scarred man leaned across the counter, close enough that Grace could smell tobacco and whiskey on his breath. "Now, you can make this easy and pack up what we need, or you can make it hard. Either way, we're leaving with supplies. Take what you want." Grace set down the can, stepping back. "Just don't hurt anyone." "Smart girl." The scarred man gestured to his companions. "Load up everything useful, food, ammunition, anything we can sell or use." Grace watched as they ransacked the store, her years of careful organization destroyed in minutes. They swept shelves clean, stuffed sacks with merchandise, and showed no care for what they damaged in the process. She stood behind the counter, memorizing their faces, noting details. The star-shaped spur on one man's boot, the distinctive leather vest worn by another, the silver ring on the scarred man's right hand. Information was power, and someday these details might matter. "You know, you're a pretty thing." The scarred man had finished loading his horse and had come back inside. His 2 companions were still outside, securing their stolen goods. "Maybe you should come with us. I could use some company." "No." Grace said it firmly, though fear coiled in her stomach like a snake. "You have what you came for. Leave now." "I don't think you're in a position to give orders, sweetheart." He reached across the counter, fast as a striking rattler, and grabbed her wrist. His fingers dug in hard enough to bruise. "I think maybe I'm going to teach you some manners." The door slammed open with enough force to rattle the hinges. Garrett Whitmore stood in the doorway, and the expression on his face was nothing like the gentle cowboy who had been courting Grace's friendship for months. He looked deadly, every inch of him coiled and ready for violence. "Let her go." His voice was cold and flat, brooking no argument. The scarred man released Grace's wrist, but didn't back away. "This doesn't concern you, cowboy. Walk away." "Can't do that." Garrett stepped fully into the store, his hand resting on his revolver. "The lady said no. That means you leave. Now." "You're making a mistake." The scarred man's own hand moved toward his gun. "There's 3 of us and 1 of you. I've faced worse odds." Garrett's eyes never left the outlaw's face. "And I'm still here to talk about it." For a long, tense moment, nobody moved. Grace could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of potential violence hanging in the air like a physical presence. Then, slowly, the scarred man stepped back. "This isn't over," he said to Garrett. Then to Grace, "You better hope your boyfriend here is as tough as he thinks he is." The 3 outlaws left, their horses laden with stolen goods. Garrett stood at the door, watching until they disappeared down the street, before finally turning to Grace. The deadly hardness had left his face, replaced by concern. "Are you hurt?" He crossed to her in 3 long strides, reaching for her wrist where the scarred man had grabbed her. Already, bruises were beginning to form in the shape of fingers. "I'm fine." Grace pulled her hand back, though not as sharply as she might have a week ago. "You shouldn't have gotten involved. Those were the Dalton boys. They're dangerous." "So am I, when I need to be." Garrett's jaw was tight. "Did you think I was going to walk away and let them hurt you?" "I'm not your responsibility, Mr. Whitmore. I thought I'd made that clear." "You did, abundantly." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "But that doesn't change the fact that I'm not going to stand by and watch someone get hurt when I can do something about it." Grace looked at him, really looked at him, and something inside her began to crack. The walls she had built so carefully, so deliberately, felt suddenly less solid than they had before. "Why?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper. "Why do you care?" "Because you're worth caring about." Garrett said it simply, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Even if you don't see it yourself. You don't know me." Grace heard the tremor in her own voice and hated it. "You don't know anything about me." "Then tell me." He stepped closer, not touching, but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Tell me why you're so determined to push everyone away. Tell me what happened to make you so afraid of letting anyone close." "I'm not afraid." But even as she said it, Grace knew it was a lie. She was terrified. Terrified of loss, of pain, of the inevitable betrayal that came from depending on another person. "I'm practical. There's a difference." "Grace." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips sent a shiver down her spine. "What those men did today, stealing from you and threatening you, that's going to keep happening. The Dalton gang is getting bolder. Sheriff Morrison is trying, but he's one man with limited resources. You need protection." "I don't need protection." Grace straightened her spine, calling on every ounce of stubborn pride she possessed. "I need to rebuild this inventory, board up the broken shelves, and figure out how to explain this loss to Mr. Henderson without giving him a heart attack. That's what I need. Not some cowboy playing hero because he thinks I'm some damsel in distress." Garrett's expression hardened. "That's not what I think, but I'm starting to believe you're right about one thing. You are too much trouble, not because you need help, but because you're so determined not to accept it that you'd rather put yourself in danger than admit you might benefit from a friend." He turned to leave, and Grace felt something lurch in her chest, something that felt dangerously like panic. "Wait." The word escaped before she could stop it, and Garrett paused, his back to her. Grace took a breath, steadying herself. "I'm sorry. I'm not good at this, at accepting help, at letting people in. My parents died 3 years ago, and before that, I watched frontier life kill or break so many people. I learned that depending on others is dangerous, that the only truly safe thing is to be self-reliant." Garrett turned back slowly. "Self-reliance is good, but there's a difference between being independent and being alone. Everyone needs somebody sometimes, Grace. That's not weakness. That's just being human." "And what if I let you help me?" Grace forced herself to meet his eyes, to be honest, in a way that scared her more than the outlaws had. What if I stop pushing you away and something happens to you because of it? What if the Dalton boys come back and you get hurt protecting me? How is that better than being alone? Understanding dawned in Garrett's expression. That's what this is really about. You're not afraid of being hurt yourself. You're afraid of being responsible for someone else getting hurt. Isn't that a reasonable fear? Grace's voice cracked slightly. Look at what just happened. Those men came in here, they threatened me, and you came rushing in like some kind of knight from the storybooks. You could have been killed. Over me. Over someone who's barely been civil to you for months. But I wasn't killed. Garrett moved closer, his movements slow and deliberate, as if approaching a skittish horse. I'm standing right here, and I made the choice to walk through that door, Grace. You didn't force me. You didn't trick me. I saw trouble, and I decided to step in. That's on me, not you. But no. He was close enough now that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. You don't get to take responsibility for my choices. I'm a grown man. I've been taking care of myself since I was 15 years old, when my parents' farm in Texas failed and they sent me to live with my uncle in Colorado. I've worked cattle drives, hunted bandits, and survived more than one winter in the high country. I know danger when I see it, and I still chose to walk through that door, because you matter. Why? Grace's voice was barely above a whisper now. Why do I matter to you? Garrett reached up slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were rough with calluses, but gentle, and Grace found herself leaning into the touch before she could think better of it. Because from the moment I walked into this store 3 months ago, I saw someone strong and brave and determined to survive in a world that's tried its best to break her. I saw someone who works 18-hour days to keep a business running, who treats every customer with respect, even when they don't deserve it, who never complains even though I know for a fact Mr. Henderson hasn't given you a raise in 2 years. I saw someone worth knowing, worth protecting, worth caring about. And the more you pushed me away, the more I understood that you weren't cold or heartless. You were scared. And that made me want to prove to you that not everyone leaves, that not everyone dies, that sometimes people stick around even when things get hard. Grace felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes and blinked them back furiously. I'm not worth the trouble. Garrett, I'm broken in ways I don't even fully understand. I don't know how to be the kind of woman who goes to church socials and dances and plans for a future with someone. I only know how to survive day by day. You're worth everything. Garrett said it with such conviction that Grace almost believed him. And I'll prove it daily if you'll let me. Not with grand gestures or fancy words, just by showing up, by being here, by being someone you can count on. That's a big promise. Grace's voice wavered despite her best efforts. People break promises all the time. Not me. Garrett's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, catching a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. I don't make promises I can't keep, and I promise you, Grace Zimmerman, I'm not going anywhere. Not unless you tell me straight out that you want me gone. And even then, I'll still be at the Broken Arrow, still coming to town for supplies, still watching out for you from a distance if that's all you'll allow. Grace closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 3 years of loneliness and fear and desperate self-reliance pressing down on her shoulders. She had been so strong for so long, had held herself together through sheer force of will and stubbornness. But standing here, with Garrett's hand warm against her face and his words wrapping around her like a blanket, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be strong alone anymore. I don't want you gone. The words felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. But I don't know how to do this, how to let someone in, how to trust that you won't leave or die or change your mind. One day at a time. Garrett's smile was soft, understanding. That's all I'm asking for. Just let me be part of your days. Let me help fix this store. Let me walk you home when it gets dark. Let me prove that I mean what I say. Grace opened her eyes, meeting his gaze, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Okay, one day at a time. The smile that broke across Garrett's face was like sunrise, warm and bright and full of promise. That's all I need. Now, let's assess the damage and figure out what needs to be replaced. I've got some money saved up. We can... No? Grace stepped back, her practical nature reasserting itself even in the midst of this emotional upheaval. I meant what I said about not accepting charity. If you want to help, you can help me reorganize and rebuild, but I'm not taking your money. Grace, I'm serious, Garrett. This is important to me. I pay my own way. Garrett studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right, but I'm going to talk to Hutchinson about buying supplies in bulk through the store. The Broken Arrow needs provisions anyway, and this way you get a guaranteed customer and steady income. That's not charity, that's business. Grace felt a smile tugging at her lips, small but genuine. That's acceptable. They spent the rest of the afternoon salvaging what they could and making lists of what needed to be reordered. Garrett worked with efficient competence, his presence somehow making the overwhelming task feel manageable. Grace found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, noting the way he moved with unconscious grace, the way his hands were gentle even when handling heavy items, the way he hummed softly under his breath when he was concentrating. "What are you humming?" she asked at one point, curious despite herself. Garrett looked up, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. "Old song my mother used to sing. Didn't even realize I was doing it. It's nice." Grace hesitated, then added, "Tell me about her. Your mother." And so Garrett told her about growing up on a hardscrabble farm in Texas, about a mother who sang while she worked, and a father who taught him to ride almost before he could walk. He told her about the drought that destroyed their crops 3 years running, about the hard decision to send their only son away to have a better chance at life. He told her about working his uncle's ranch in Colorado, learning the cattle business, saving every penny until he had enough to strike out on his own. "I've been looking for the right place to settle," he said as they worked. "Somewhere I could maybe start my own spread someday, build something lasting. Shoshone City feels right, you know? The land's good, the people are decent, and there's potential here." "And me?" Grace asked, surprising herself with her boldness. "Do I factor into these plans?" Garrett met her eyes, his expression serious. "If you'll let me, yes. I'm not going to lie to you, Grace. From the moment I saw you, something just clicked into place, like I'd been looking for you without even knowing it. I know that sounds foolish and romantic, and maybe it is, but it's also true." Grace's heart was pounding, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "It does sound foolish and romantic and completely impractical. Sometimes the best things are." Garrett set down the crate he was holding and crossed to where she stood. "I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or make any big promises. I'm just asking you to give us, a chance. Let me court you properly. Let me take you to that church social. Let me show you that I mean what I say." Grace took a deep breath, feeling as if she stood on the edge of something momentous. Every instinct she had honed over 3 years of survival screamed at her to say no, to protect herself, to maintain her careful distance. But there was another voice, quieter but growing stronger, that whispered about possibility and hope, and the chance for something more than just existing. "One condition," she said finally. "Name it. You have to promise to be honest with me, always, even when the truth is hard or uncomfortable. I can handle a lot of things, Garrett, but I can't handle lies or false promises." "That's an easy promise to make." Garrett held out his hand, formal and old-fashioned. "You have my word, Grace Zimmerman. Nothing but honesty between us, come what may." Grace looked at his hand for a long moment, then slowly reached out and clasped it. His grip was warm and solid, and when he smiled, she felt something tight in her chest finally begin to loosen. "So," Garrett said, still holding her hand, "about that church social on Saturday." Grace laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that surprised them both. "Yes, all right. I'll go to your church social." "Our church social," Garrett corrected gently. "You live here too. You're part of this community, whether you've let yourself acknowledge it or not." It was a startling thought. Grace had lived in Shoshone City for 2 years, but she had never really considered herself part of it. She was always just passing through, just temporarily settled, just waiting for the next disaster to uproot her again. But maybe Garrett was right. Maybe it was time to stop running from permanence and start building towards something stable. That night, after Garrett had left and Grace was alone in her small room behind the store, she allowed herself to examine the strange flutter of hope that had taken root in her chest. It felt fragile and dangerous, like holding a baby bird. One wrong move could crush it entirely, but it also felt precious, worth protecting, worth nurturing into something stronger. Sleep came easier than it had in months, and for the first time in years, Grace dreamed of the future instead of just survival. The days leading up to the church social passed in a blur of activity. Grace threw herself into rebuilding the store's inventory, working closely with Garrett to coordinate a bulk order for the Broken Arrow. True to his word, he showed up every day, helping with heavy lifting and repairs, always respectful, always careful not to push too hard or too fast. But there were moments, a brush of hands as they both reached for the same ledger, the way Garrett's eyes followed her as she moved around the store, the soft conversations they had during breaks, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Grace found herself opening up in ways she never had before, telling him about the wagon journey west, about watching her mother waste away from cholera, about her father's quiet grief that turned to illness shortly after. "I was alone in a camp full of strangers," she said one afternoon, as they sorted through a delivery of dry goods, "and I realized that no one really cared what happened to me. They had their own problems, their own tragedies. I was just another orphan in a world full of them. So I learned to care for myself, because no one else was going to do it. That must have been terrifying." Garrett's voice was soft with compassion. It was freeing in a way. Grace arranged cans with precise movements, a physical outlet for the emotions stirring inside her. "Once I accepted that I was on my own, I stopped expecting anything from anyone. And when you don't expect anything, you can't be disappointed. But you also can't be surprised by joy," Garrett pointed out. "You can't be lifted up or supported. You can't share the burden when things get too heavy to carry alone." "I'm starting to understand that." Grace paused, then turned to face him fully. "Being with you, even just as friends these past few days, has shown me what I've been missing. It's terrifying, but it's also good. Really good." The look Garrett gave her was warm enough to melt ice. "I'm glad. And I promise you, Grace, I'm going to keep proving that letting me in was the right choice." Saturday arrived with clear skies and unusually warm temperatures for October. Grace spent the morning in an agony of indecision about what to wear. Her wardrobe was practical, built for work rather than social occasions. She had precisely 2 dresses that weren't stained or patched, and neither seemed appropriate for something as significant as her first real social outing in years. In the end, she chose the blue cotton dress her mother had made her 4 years ago, just before they left Missouri. It was simple, but well constructed, with tiny buttons down the front and a modest neckline. Grace brushed out her dark blonde hair, leaving it loose rather than in her usual practical bun. Looking at herself in the small mirror above her wash basin, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Garrett arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, as promised. He wore clean clothes and had clearly made an effort with his appearance, though there was still that slightly dangerous edge to him that no amount of grooming could erase. When he saw Grace, he stopped dead in the doorway, his expression stunned. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Grace felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's just an old dress." "It's not the dress." Garrett stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Though the dress is lovely, it's you. I've never seen you with your hair down. It suits you. I wear it up for work. It's more practical." "Grace," Garrett waited until she met his eyes. "You don't have to explain or justify. I was just paying you a compliment. You're allowed to accept it." "Thank you." The words felt rusty on her tongue, unfamiliar from disuse. "You look nice, too." His smile was bright enough to rival the October sun. "Thank you. Now, shall we? I believe there's a social to attend." The church social was held in the small building that served as both school and community center for Shoshone City. By the time Grace and Garrett arrived, it was already crowded with townspeople, their voices creating a warm buzz of conversation. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and someone had cleared space in the center for dancing. A small group of musicians were tuning their instruments in the corner, preparing to play. Grace felt her anxiety spike as they entered. She recognized faces from the store, but that was different from actually socializing with these people. At the store, she was in her element, in control. Here, she felt exposed and uncertain. "Hey there, Whitmore." A burly man with a red beard clapped Garrett on the shoulder. "Glad you could make it. And who's this lovely lady?" "Jim Hutchinson. Meet Grace Zimmerman. She runs the general store for Mr. Henderson. Grace, Jim's my boss at the Broken Arrow. Miss Zimmerman, it's a pleasure to finally meet you properly." Jim's handshake was firm, but friendly. "Garrett here hasn't stopped talking about you since he started working for me, beginning to think he took the job just to stay close to town." "Jim, Garrett said, a warning note in his voice, but he was smiling. Grace felt something warm bloom in her chest. "It's nice to meet you too, Mr. Hutchinson. Garrett says you're a fair employer." "I try to be, and Garrett's one of the best hands I've ever hired. Got a real knack with horses." Jim's expression turned more serious. "I heard about the trouble with the Dalton gang at your store. You doing all right?" "I'm fine, thank you. We've managed to rebuild most of the inventory." "Glad to hear it. You need anything, you let me know. The Broken Arrow looks after its neighbors." After Jim moved on to greet other arrivals, Garrett leaned close and murmured, "See, you're part of the community, whether you believed it or not." Before Grace could respond, several women approached, welcoming her with genuine warmth. Martha Peters, the doctor's wife, Sarah Chen, who ran the boarding house, Eliza Morrison, the sheriff's daughter. They drew Grace into their circle, asking about the store, sharing town gossip, making her feel included in a way she never had before. "We've been hoping you'd come to one of these socials," Martha said, her kind face creased with a smile. "You work so hard at that store. It's nice to see you taking time for yourself." "I'm not very good at socializing," Grace admitted, surprising herself with the honesty. "None of us were at first," Sarah said with a laugh. "But you'll find we're a friendly bunch once you get to know us, and it doesn't hurt that you've got Shoshone City's most eligible bachelor courting you." Grace felt her cheeks heat. "We're just friends." "Honey, that man doesn't look at you like a friend." Eliza's eyes sparkled with mischief. "He looks at you like you hung the moon and stars." Grace glanced across the room to where Garrett stood talking with a group of ranchers. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, and when their eyes met, he smiled. It was a private smile, intimate despite the crowded room, and Grace felt her heart skip a beat. "Maybe a little more than friends," she conceded quietly, and the women laughed with delight. The afternoon passed more pleasantly than Grace had imagined possible. She ate good food, listened to lively music, and actually enjoyed the company of the townspeople. When the dancing started, Garrett claimed her immediately for a reel, taking her hand and leading her to the floor. "I should warn you, I don't really know how to dance," Grace said nervously as they took their positions. "Follow my lead, I'll talk you through it." Garrett's hand was warm at her waist, steadying and sure. "And if you step on my feet, I promise not to complain." The music started, and Grace stumbled through the first few steps, hyper-aware of everyone watching. But Garrett was patient, guiding her with gentle pressure and murmured instructions, and gradually she began to relax into the rhythm. By the end of the dance, she was breathless and laughing, her earlier anxieties forgotten. "You're a natural," Garrett said as he led her off the floor. "I'm terrible, and you know it." "You're having fun. That's what matters." They found seats along the wall, catching their breath and watching the other dancers. Grace felt different somehow, lighter than she had in years. The constant weight of worry and vigilance that she carried had eased slightly, making room for something she was almost afraid to name. "Thank you," she said quietly, her eyes on the swirling dancers. "For pushing me to come here, for not giving up on me even when I was terrible to you." "You were never terrible." Garrett's shoulder brushed against hers, a casual contact that sent shivers down her spine. "Cautious, maybe, protective of yourself, but never terrible. I told you I wasn't worth the trouble, and I told you that you're worth everything." Garrett turned to face her more fully, his expression serious. "I meant it, Grace. Every word. You're one of the strongest, bravest, most capable people I've ever met. And under all that armor you wear, you're also kind and funny and so beautiful. It makes my chest ache just to look at you." Grace's breath caught. "Garrett, I know this is fast. I know we've only really been spending time together for a week, but I also know what I feel, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I'm falling in love with you, Grace Zimmerman. Have been since the day I walked into that store and saw you standing there covered in dust and determination. And I wanted you to know, before this goes any further, exactly where I stand." Grace's heart was racing so fast, she felt lightheaded. Every instinct screamed at her to pull away, to protect herself, to deny what she was feeling. But she had promised herself she would try, would take this one day at a time, would give Garrett and herself a chance. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm so scared, Garrett, because I feel it too. Whatever this is between us, it's real and powerful, and it terrifies me. What if something happens? What if the Dalton gang comes back? What if you get hurt because of me? What if I'd let myself love you and then lose you? What if none of those things happen? Garrett countered gently. What if we build something good together? What if we face whatever comes side by side? What if you let yourself be happy, Grace, and it turns out to be the best decision you ever made? Grace looked at him, really looked at him, and saw nothing but sincerity and hope and a love so genuine it brought tears to her eyes. She thought about the life she had been living, the careful, controlled, lonely existence she had convinced herself was enough. And then she thought about the past week, the lightness she felt when Garrett was near, the way he made her laugh, the sense of possibility that bloomed whenever he smiled at her. I want to try, she said finally. I want to let myself hope that this could work, but I need you to be patient with me. I need you to understand that I'm going to stumble and probably push you away sometimes out of pure habit. I need you to promise that you'll tell me when I do that you'll call me on it instead of just letting me retreat. I promise. Garrett raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent heat racing through her veins. And I promise to be patient, to go at whatever pace you need, to prove every single day that I'm not going anywhere. The rest of the social passed in a warm haze. They danced twice more, ate pie that Grace barely tasted, and talked with what seemed like half the town. By the time Garrett walked her home as the sun was setting, Grace felt like a different person than the one who had woken up that morning. They paused at the door to the store, the street quiet around them. Golden light from the setting sun painted everything in warm tones, and somewhere nearby a dog was barking. Normal sounds, safe sounds. The sounds of a life Grace was just beginning to let herself believe in. "Can I see you tomorrow?" Garrett asked, still holding her hand. "It's Sunday. The store is closed." Grace hesitated, then added, "But you could come by anyway. We could take a walk maybe, or just sit and talk." "I'd like that." Garrett's free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle. "Can I kiss you, Grace?" Her breath caught, but she nodded, unable to form words. Garrett leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. And when his lips finally met hers, it was soft and sweet and full of promise. Grace felt something in her chest crack wide open. 3 years of carefully maintained walls crumbling in the face of this man's gentle persistence. When they parted, Garrett rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. "I'll see you tomorrow," he murmured. "Tomorrow," Grace agreed, and watched as he walked away into the gathering darkness. That night, lying in her small bed, Grace allowed herself to examine the hope that had taken root in her heart. It was still fragile, still frightening, but it was also growing stronger. For the first time since her parents died, she let herself imagine a future that included more than just survival, a future that included love and partnership and building something lasting. It was a heady, terrifying, wonderful feeling. The next few weeks passed in a golden haze. Autumn deepened into early winter, and as the days grew shorter and colder, Grace's relationship with Garrett grew warmer and stronger. They fell into a comfortable rhythm. Garrett would arrive at the store each morning before heading to the Broken Arrow, helping her with the heavy work and stealing kisses when no customers were around. He would return in the evenings, and they would eat dinner together in Grace's small room, talking about everything and nothing. Grace learned that Garrett had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard. He learned that Grace had a passion for reading and had been teaching herself arithmetic from old textbooks. They shared their dreams, their fears, their histories. Grace told him about the time she had accidentally set fire to the only dress she owned while trying to cook over a campfire. Garrett told her about breaking 3 ribs during a cattle drive and finishing the job anyway because he needed the money. "You're insane," Grace said, half laughing, half horrified. "I'm practical," Garrett corrected with a grin. "The cattle didn't care about my ribs. They still needed to get to market." "That's the worst logic I've ever heard," says the woman who once walked 5 miles in a blizzard to deliver medicine to a sick child. Grace blinked. "How did you know about that?" "Martha Peters told me. Said you showed up half frozen but wouldn't accept any thanks or payment." Garrett's expression was fond. "See, we're both stubborn and practical. We're perfect for each other." And somehow, impossibly, it seemed like he might be right. Grace found herself smiling more, worrying less. The constant vigilance that had defined her life for 3 years began to ease, replaced by a cautious but growing sense of security. She still had moments of panic, times when old fears would surge up and she would push Garrett away with harsh words. But true to his promise, he never let her retreat far. He would call her on it, gently but firmly, and she would take a breath and try again. Mr. Henderson's health took a turn for the worse in mid-November. The old man called Grace to his home one evening, and she found him propped up in bed, looking frail and gray. "I'm dying, girl," he said bluntly. "Doctor gives me maybe a month, 2 if I'm lucky." Grace felt her throat tighten. "Mr. Henderson, don't. I've had a good life, longer than many get out here, but I need to settle my affairs." He gestured to a stack of papers on the bedside table. "The store. I want you to have it." Grace stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? You've been running it for 2 years now. Built it up from barely breaking even to actually turning a profit. You care about it, about the customers. It should be yours." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made Grace wince. "Papers are all drawn up legal. My lawyer has the deeds. When I pass, the store and this house both go to you. Consider it payment for 2 years of underpaid labor." "I can't accept this." Grace's voice was shaking. "It's too much." "It's exactly right." Mr. Henderson fixed her with a surprisingly sharp gaze. "You've got that cowboy now, Garrett Whitmore. Good man. That one. You'll be wanting to marry eventually, start a family. This gives you security, a foundation to build on." "Mr. Henderson, I don't know what to say. Say you'll accept it. Say you'll keep the store running, serve the community the way you have been. That's all I ask." Grace felt tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "Don't thank me yet. Running a business is hard work, and winter's coming. You'll earn every inch of what I'm giving you." But his eyes were kind, and when Grace impulsively hugged him, he patted her back with a trembling hand. "You're a good girl, Grace. Your parents would be proud." When she told Garrett later that night, he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests. "This is wonderful. Do you understand what this means? You'll own property. You'll have real security. It feels wrong to be happy about it when Mr. Henderson is dying. He's happy about it." Garrett set her down, but kept his arms around her waist. "He's making sure you're taken care of. That's a gift, Grace. A huge gift. Don't diminish it by feeling guilty. I just keep thinking about all the ways it could go wrong. What if the store fails? What if I can't manage it on my own? What if you succeed?" Garrett interrupted gently. "What if you build something amazing, and you won't be on your own? You'll have me. We're partners, remember?" Grace looked up at him, at the strength and certainty in his face, and felt her anxiety begin to ease. "Partners?" she agreed softly. "I like the sound of that." "Good, because I have something I want to ask you, and now seems like the right time." Garrett took a deep breath, his expression turning serious. "Grace Zimmerman, I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you try so hard to protect everyone around you. I love how you care for your customers, how you work yourself to exhaustion to keep the store running, how you're slowly learning to let me in, despite every instinct telling you to push me away. I know we've only been together for a few weeks, but I also know what I want. I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to help you run the store and build a life here in Shoshone City. I want to have a family with you someday, children with your eyes and your fierce heart. Will you marry me?" Grace's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. 3 months ago, if someone had told her she would be standing here, being proposed to by a cowboy she was head over heels in love with, she would have called them crazy. But here she was, and the only thing she felt was joy so intense it was almost painful. "Yes." The word came out as barely more than a whisper, so she said it again, louder. "Yes, Garrett Whitmore, I'll marry you." Garrett's whoop of joy could probably be heard 3 streets over. He picked her up again, spinning until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he finally set her down, he kissed her with a passion that made her knees weak and her head spin. "I don't have a ring yet," he said when they finally came up for air. "I wanted to ask before I spent money. I wasn't sure you'd let me spend on you." "I don't need a ring." Grace was still holding on to him, afraid that if she let go, this perfect moment might dissolve like morning mist. "I just need you. You'll have a ring anyway, and a proper wedding, with the whole town invited, and a wedding night that will make you forget every worry you've ever had." The heat in Garrett's eyes made Grace blush to the roots of her hair. "That's quite a promise, Mr. Whitmore." "I always keep my promises, Miss Zimmerman. You should know that by now. They decided on a January wedding, giving themselves time to plan, but not so long that the waiting would drive them crazy. In the meantime, Grace threw herself into learning everything she could about running the store as an owner, rather than just a manager. Mr. Henderson, despite his failing health, proved to be a font of knowledge about suppliers, pricing, and the intricate network of trade that kept a small frontier store afloat. Most important thing, he told her one afternoon, his voice weak but his mind still sharp, is to remember that you're not just selling goods, you're providing a service to the community. Sometimes that means extending credit to families going through hard times. Sometimes it means staying open late for someone who needs medicine for a sick child. The money matters, but the relationships matter more. Grace thought about that as she worked. She had always been good with the practical side of running the store. But Mr. Henderson was teaching her about the human side, the way a kind word could matter as much as a fair price, the way building trust with customers created loyalty that transcended simple economics. Garrett, meanwhile, was working extra hours at the Broken Arrow, saving money for their future. He had dreams of eventually buying his own land, starting a small ranch. Nothing huge, he told Grace one evening as they sat together in her room, her head resting on his shoulder. Just enough to run some cattle, maybe breed horses. Something we can build together. That sounds wonderful. Grace traced patterns on his chest, marveling at how comfortable she had become with physical affection. A few months ago, she would have flinched away from such intimacy. Now it felt natural, right? But let's get through this winter first, and the wedding. Speaking of which, have you thought about what kind of dress you want? Grace laughed. I'm not sure I need anything fancy. We could just do it simple, at the church. Grace. Garrett tilted her chin up, his expression serious. This is your wedding, our wedding. It should be however you want it to be. If you want simple, we'll do simple. If you want the whole town there with a white dress and flowers and a celebration that lasts 3 days, we'll do that. Don't downplay what you want because you think it's too much trouble. It was a familiar refrain, one Garrett had repeated in various forms since the day they met. Grace was slowly learning to accept that her wants and needs mattered, that asking for things wasn't selfish or burdensome. It was a hard lesson for someone who had spent years making herself as small and undemanding as possible. I want something in between, she said finally. Not too fancy, but not just a quick ceremony either. I want our friends there. I want it to feel special. Then that's what we'll have. Garrett kissed her forehead. I'll make sure of it. Mr. Henderson passed away 3 days before Christmas, slipping away peacefully in his sleep. The funeral was well attended, a testament to the respect the old man had earned in his years in Shoshone City. Grace stood beside Garrett during the service, grateful for his solid presence as she mourned the man who had given her a chance when she desperately needed one. He was a good man, Garrett murmured as they stood at the graveside, watching the coffin being lowered into the frozen ground. And he clearly cared a great deal about you. He saved my life. Grace's voice was thick with tears. When I came to Shoshone City, I was down to my last dollar. I had no prospects, no family, nothing. He took one look at me and offered me a job. He didn't even ask for references or experience. He just saw someone who needed help and helped. And now you get to honor his memory by continuing what he built. Garrett squeezed her hand. That's a precious gift, Grace. The reading of the will took place a week later, in the lawyer's office. As promised, Mr. Henderson had left the store and his modest house to Grace, along with a small amount of cash to help with the transition. There were a few other small bequests to friends and the church, but the bulk of his estate went to Grace. There's one more thing, the lawyer said, pulling out a sealed envelope. Mr. Henderson asked me to give you this letter after the will was read. Grace took the envelope with trembling hands, recognizing Mr. Henderson's spidery handwriting on the front. That night, alone in her room, she opened it and read, Dear Grace, if you're reading this, then I've finally shuffled off this mortal coil, as they say. Don't mourn me too much. I've lived a good long life, and I'm looking forward to seeing my dear wife again on the other side. I wanted to explain why I'm leaving you the store. You might think it's because you worked hard, and you did. You might think it's because you were loyal, and you were. But the real reason is simpler than that. In the 2 years you worked for me, you reminded me of my daughter. I never told you this, but Eliza and I had a daughter once, Sarah. She would have been about your age now. She died of scarlet fever when she was just 8 years old, and it nearly destroyed us both. Eliza never really recovered, and when she passed, part of me was relieved that she could finally be with Sarah again. When you walked into my store that day, desperate and proud and determined not to show how scared you were, I saw Sarah in you, the daughter I lost, the woman she might have grown up to be. I hired you because I needed help, but I kept you on because you became like family to me. So this isn't charity, Grace. This is a father making sure his daughter is provided for. This is me trying to give you the security and foundation that Sarah never got to have. Build a good life. Marry that cowboy of yours. Have children and raise them to be as strong and brave as you are. And when you think of me, remember that you gave an old man joy in his final years just by being yourself. With all my love and best wishes, John Henderson Grace read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. She had spent so many years feeling alone in the world, and now she realized that she had been loved more than she knew. Mr. Henderson had seen her not as an employee, not as a burden, but as family. It was a gift more precious than any property or money could ever be. When Garrett arrived the next morning, she showed him the letter. He read it silently, then pulled her into his arms and held her while she cried. No words, no platitudes, just solid, comforting presence. It was exactly what she needed. "I'm the luckiest woman in the world," Grace said when she finally pulled back, wiping at her eyes. "I have you, I have the store, I have friends here. A few months ago, I had nothing. How did everything change so fast?" "You let it change." Garrett cupped her face in his hands, his expression tender. "You took a risk. You let me in. You chose hope over fear. That took more courage than most people have, Grace." "I'm still scared sometimes," she admitted. "I wake up in the middle of the night convinced that something terrible is going to happen, that the Dalton gang will come back, or you'll get hurt, or the store will fail, or..." "That's normal." Garrett interrupted her spiral gently. "Everyone has fears. The difference is that you're not letting them control you anymore. You acknowledge them, but you don't let them stop you from living. That's all any of us can do." Christmas came and went in a flurry of preparations for the wedding. Grace worked with the other women in town to plan a celebration that was modest but meaningful. She ordered a simple but pretty white dress from the dressmaker, and Garrett commissioned a local blacksmith to craft 2 simple gold bands. They decided to hold the ceremony in the church with a reception afterward in the community center. The Dalton gang continued to be a problem, hitting several ranches and even stopping a stagecoach just outside of town. Sheriff Morrison formed a posse and spent weeks tracking them, but the outlaws were cunning and always seemed to be one step ahead. Garrett rode with the posse a few times, despite Grace's protests. "I know you're scared," he told her after returning from one such expedition, tired and dusty, but unharmed. "But this is important. Those men need to be stopped before someone gets killed." "What if that someone is you?" Grace's voice was sharp with fear and anger. "What if you don't come back from one of these rides? What then? Then you'll know that I died trying to make this place safer for you and everyone else in Shoshone City." Garrett's expression was serious. "I'm not trying to be a hero, Grace, but I can't sit by and do nothing while dangerous men threaten the people I care about." "That's exactly what you're trying to be. A hero." Grace paced her small room, agitation making her restless. "And heroes get killed, Garrett. They die noble deaths and leave behind people who love them." "Grace, look at me." Garrett waited until she stopped pacing and faced him. "I'm going to do everything in my power to stay safe. I'm not taking unnecessary risks, but I also can't be the kind of man who hides while others fight to protect our community. That's not who I am. If you're going to marry me, you need to accept that." It was a hard truth, but it was the truth. Grace took a deep breath, forcing herself to be rational. I do know that, but I still hate it. I understand, and I love you for caring so much." Garrett pulled her into his arms, and Grace let herself lean into his strength. "But I promise you, I will always come back to you. Always." It was a promise he couldn't really make, and they both knew it, but Grace chose to believe it anyway, because the alternative was living in constant terror, and she had already decided she was done with that. The wedding took place on a cold but clear January day, with half of Shoshone City crammed into the small church. Grace wore her white dress and carried a small bouquet of dried wildflowers that Martha Peters had saved from the summer. Garrett stood at the altar in his best clothes, his eyes never leaving Grace's face as she walked down the aisle. The ceremony itself was simple but beautiful. They spoke their vows in clear, steady voices, promising to love and honor each other through whatever trials lay ahead. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Garrett's kiss was gentle and reverent, a promise sealed in front of God and their community. The reception was a joyous affair. There was food and music and dancing, and Grace found herself laughing more than she had in years. She danced with Garrett, with Sheriff Morrison, with Jim Hutchinson, and even with the shy young clerk from the bank. Everyone wanted to congratulate them, to wish them well, to be part of their happiness. "You look radiant," Martha Peters told her during a quiet moment. "Like a completely different person from the scared girl who arrived here 2 years ago." "I feel different." Grace watched Garrett across the room, deep in conversation with some of the other ranchers. "I never thought I could have this. A husband, a home, people who care about me. It still doesn't feel quite real." "It's real, honey, and you deserve every bit of it." Martha squeezed her hand. "You've worked hard and stayed true to yourself. Now, you get to enjoy the rewards." That night, in the small house that had been Mr. Henderson's and was now theirs, Garrett carried Grace over the threshold. The house had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a parlor, modest by any standards but luxurious compared to the tiny room behind the store where Grace had been living. "Welcome home, Mrs. Whitmore," Garrett said, setting her down gently. Grace felt a thrill run through her at the sound of her new name. "Mrs. Whitmore, I like how that sounds." "So do I." Garrett's eyes had darkened with an emotion Grace was beginning to recognize. "Now, I believe I made you a promise about a wedding night that would make you forget all your worries." Heat flooded through Grace's body. They had been careful about physical intimacy before the wedding, never going further than passionate kisses. But now, as husband and wife, there were no more barriers between them. "I believe you did make that promise." Garrett's smile was slow and wicked. "Then let me keep it." He led her to the bedroom, and what followed was tender and passionate and everything Grace had hoped for. Garrett was patient and attentive, taking his time to learn what made her gasp and sigh. He whispered words of love and praise against her skin, making her feel beautiful and cherished. And when they finally came together, it felt like the final piece of something slotting into place, 2 separate people becoming one unit. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Grace felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much, Garrett." "I love you too." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I'm going to prove it every single day for the rest of our lives." The first months of marriage were an adjustment, but a happy one. Grace discovered that sharing her life with someone was both easier and harder than she had imagined. Easier because Garrett helped with everything, from managing the store to cooking dinner. Harder because she had to learn to compromise, to consider someone else's needs and preferences, to communicate instead of just retreating into herself when things got difficult. But they made it work. Grace learned to share her worries instead of bottling them up. Garrett learned when to push and when to give her space. They established routines and rituals that became the foundation of their life together. Coffee and conversation before sunrise, working side by side at the store during the day, dinner together every evening, no matter how busy they were, making love at night and falling asleep in each other's arms. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and bringing the first green shoots pushing up through the earth. Grace discovered she was pregnant in late March, and the joy on Garrett's face when she told him was something she would treasure forever. "A baby," he kept repeating, his hand resting reverently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Grace asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." Garrett pulled her into a gentle embrace. "You've given me everything I ever wanted, Grace. A home, a purpose, and now, a family. I'm the luckiest man alive." The pregnancy was fairly easy, though Grace was exhausted for the first few months. Garrett took on more of the store work, insisting that she rest whenever she needed to. The women of Shoshone City rallied around her, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and words of encouragement. "You're going to be a wonderful mother," Martha Peters told her one afternoon. "You have so much love to give, even if you try to hide it under all that practicality. Grace laughed. I'm terrified I'm going to mess it up. What if I'm not good at this? What if I can't give the baby what they need? Every new mother feels that way. Martha's expression was kind. But you'll learn, just like we all did. And you have Garrett. That man adores you. He'll be right there with you every step of the way. It was true. Garrett was attentive and protective, sometimes to the point of driving Grace crazy. He worried about her lifting heavy items, insisted she eat enough, and hovered whenever she so much as frowned. But it came from love, and Grace learned to accept his concern as the gift it was. The Dalton gang finally met their end in May. Sheriff Morrison's posse cornered them in a box canyon about 20 miles from Shoshone City, and after a brief but fierce gunfight, 2 of the gang were killed and the rest surrendered. The scarred man who had threatened Grace that day in the store was among the dead, and while Grace didn't celebrate any death, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders knowing that particular threat was gone. It's over, Garrett said when he brought her the news. You're safe now. I was safe with you, Grace corrected softly. But I'm glad they won't be hurting anyone else. Their son was born on a warm November night, arriving with a lusty cry that announced his presence to the world. Garrett was with Grace through the entire labor, holding her hand and offering encouragement, even when she cursed him for getting her pregnant in the first place. When the midwife finally placed the baby in Grace's arms, she felt a love so fierce and immediate it took her breath away. He's perfect, she whispered, staring down at the tiny face, the miniature fingers that gripped her thumb with surprising strength. Garrett, he's absolutely perfect. Just like his mother. Garrett's voice was thick with emotion. He reached out to trace one finger down their son's cheek. What should we name him? They had discussed names but never settled on anything definite. Now, holding their son, Grace knew exactly what felt right. John, after Mr. Henderson. Is that all right with you? Garrett's smile was radiant. It's perfect, John Whitmore. Welcome to the world, little man. The next few years passed in a blur of joy and exhaustion, and more love than Grace had ever imagined possible. John was a happy baby who grew into an energetic toddler, always into everything, always curious about the world around him. Garrett proved to be a natural father, patient and playful, teaching John to ride almost before he could walk. Grace managed to balance motherhood with running the store, though it was a constant challenge. She hired a young woman named Rebecca to help with the day-to-day operations, which freed Grace up to spend more time with John while still overseeing the business. The store continued to thrive, becoming a central hub of the community. In the spring of 1886, Garrett finally saved enough to buy a piece of land about 5 miles from town. It wasn't much, just 80 acres of rough grazing land and a creek, but it was theirs. They began building a ranch house slowly, whenever they could spare the time and money. It was hard work, but satisfying, creating something permanent that they could pass down to their children. Yes, children plural. Grace discovered she was pregnant again in the summer of 1886, and their daughter Emma was born the following March. She was quieter than John had been, more contemplative, with Garrett's amber eyes and Grace's stubborn chin. Grace marveled at how different 2 children from the same parents could be. Our family is complete, Garrett said one evening, holding Emma while John played at their feet. They were sitting on the porch of their still unfinished ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains. You don't want more? Grace asked, smiling. I'd be happy with a dozen more if you wanted them. Garrett looked at her with that expression of absolute devotion that still made her heart skip. But I'm also content with what we have. 2 healthy children, a good business, land of our own. We've built something real here, Grace, something lasting. Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the truth of his words. 5 years ago, she had been alone and terrified, convinced that depending on anyone else was too dangerous. Now she was surrounded by love, part of a family and a community, building a future that extended beyond just survival. I was so wrong, she said softly. That day you came into the store and offered to help. I told you I wasn't worth the trouble. And I told you that you were worth everything. Garrett pressed a kiss to her hair. I was right. You were. Grace turned to look up at him. And you've proved it daily, just like you promised. Every single day, Garrett. You've shown me that I was worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth loving. You gave me back my life. You gave me mine. Garrett's expression was serious now. "I was drifting before I found you, Grace, looking for something without really knowing what it was. And then I walked into that store and saw you, and suddenly everything made sense. You were what I'd been searching for. Home, purpose, love, everything that matters." John chose that moment to toddle over, demanding attention, and the serious conversation dissolved into laughter and play. But the words lingered, a reaffirmation of the promises they had made to each other 5 years ago. As the years continued to pass, the Whitmore family prospered. The ranch grew as Garrett bought adjacent land and built up a respectable herd of cattle. The store remained successful, with Rebecca eventually becoming a full partner in the business. John and Emma grew healthy and strong, joined by 2 more siblings over the years, another son named Michael and a daughter named Sarah, named after Mr. Henderson's lost daughter. Grace never lost her practical nature, but she learned to temper it with openness and trust. She remained fiercely independent in many ways, but she had also learned the value of partnership, of sharing burdens and joys alike. The walls she had built around her heart never disappeared entirely, but they had doors now, doors that opened for the people she loved. Shoshone City grew and changed around them. The railroad came through in 1890, bringing new opportunities and new challenges. More families settled in the area, drawn by good land and the promise of prosperity. The town that had been rough and half-formed when Grace first arrived became established and respectable, with proper schools and churches and even a small library. Through it all, Grace and Garrett remained at the center of their community, respected and loved. They had weathered storms both literal and figurative, harsh winters and summer droughts, economic downturns and personal losses. But they had weathered them together, and that made all the difference. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Garrett surprised Grace with a trip back to the church where they had married. It was a clear January day, much like the day they had spoken their vows, and the church was empty except for the 2 of them. "I wanted to bring you back here," Garrett said, holding both her hands in his, "to the place where we started this journey, to remind you of the promises we made." "I remember." Grace's voice was soft with emotion. "We promised to love and honor each other, to face whatever came together. And we have." Garrett reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I never gave you a proper engagement ring. We were too practical, too focused on building our life together. But I want you to have this now, a symbol of everything we've built, everything we've become." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing ostentatious but clearly chosen with care. Grace felt tears prickling at her eyes as he slipped it onto her finger beside her worn wedding band. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You're beautiful." Garrett cupped her face in his hands, the gesture as familiar now as breathing. "Grace Whitmore, you are my best friend, my partner, my love. You have given me 20 years of happiness beyond anything I ever imagined. You've given me children and a home and a purpose. You've challenged me and supported me and loved me even when I didn't deserve it. And I want you to know that if I could go back and live my life over again, I wouldn't change a single thing, because every choice, every hardship, every moment led me to you." Grace was crying openly now. "I love you. I have loved you since the moment you walked into that store and refused to give up on me. Even when I was difficult and stubborn and determined to push you away, you saw something in me worth fighting for. You taught me that I was worth everything, and you've spent 20 years proving it daily. You've given me the life I was too afraid to even dream about." They kissed there in the empty church, sealing their renewed vows with the same passion and commitment they had felt on their wedding day. When they finally pulled apart, both were laughing through their tears. "Come on," Garrett said, taking her hand. "Let's go home. The kids will be wondering where we disappeared to." Home. Such a simple word, but it contained everything that mattered. Grace thought about the scared, lonely woman she had been when she first arrived in Shoshone City, convinced that depending on anyone was a weakness she couldn't afford. And then she thought about the woman she was now: wife, mother, businesswoman, friend, beloved member of a community. The transformation still amazed her sometimes. They walked out of the church into the bright winter sunlight, hand in hand. Their 4 children were waiting at home, probably causing cheerful chaos. The store would open tomorrow, and there were cattle to tend, and a dozen other responsibilities waiting for them. Life on the frontier was never easy, never simple, but it was good. So very, very good. That evening, after the children were finally in bed and the house was quiet, Grace and Garrett sat together on their porch, wrapped in a shared blanket against the January chill. The stars were brilliant overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if I hadn't walked into that store?" Garrett asked, his arms around Grace. "Sometimes." Grace nestled closer to him. "I think I would have survived. I'm good at survival. But I wouldn't have lived. Not really. You taught me the difference. We taught each other." Garrett pressed a kiss to her temple. "You showed me that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone in. That vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage. And you showed me that not everyone leaves, that some people stay, even when things get hard, especially when things get hard." Grace turned in his arms to face him. "You've kept every promise you ever made to me, Garrett. Every single one. And I'll keep making them and keeping them until my last breath." His expression was solemn, sincere. "You are worth everything, Grace. Everything good in my life starts and ends with you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of their ranch, their home, their life. Inside, their children slept safe and warm. The store waited in town, solid and successful. The cattle grazed peacefully in the fields. Everything they had built together, everything they had become. Grace thought about writing a letter to her younger self, the girl who had been so certain that depending on others was dangerous. She would tell that girl that, yes, love is risky. Yes, opening your heart means risking pain. But the alternative, the careful, controlled loneliness she had cultivated, wasn't safety. It was just a different kind of dying. She would tell that girl to take the risk, to say yes when a handsome cowboy with amber eyes asks if you need help, to let down the walls even though every instinct screams at you to keep them up, to believe, against all odds and experience, that maybe, just maybe, this time could be different, because this time was different. This time, the risk had paid off beyond her wildest dreams. This time, the cowboy who said she was worth everything had proved it daily for 20 years and showed no signs of stopping. This time, love hadn't led to loss and pain, but to joy and family and a life so rich and full, it sometimes overwhelmed her with gratitude. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked, reading her expression in the way only he could after 20 years together. "About how lucky I am." Grace smiled up at him. "About how that scared girl who walked into Shoshone City with nothing could never have imagined all of this. About how grateful I am that you were too stubborn to take no for an answer. Best stubbornness I ever committed." Garrett's answering smile was warm and full of love. "And I plan to keep being stubborn about loving you for the next 20 years, and the 20 after that, and however many more God grants us." "That's a lot of stubbornness." Grace laughed, the sound joyful and free. "You're worth it." Garrett pulled her closer, and Grace let herself sink into his warmth, his strength, his love. "You're worth everything. Always have been. Always will be." And there, under the vast Idaho sky, surrounded by everything they had built together, Grace Whitmore finally understood the truth she had been too frightened to accept all those years ago. She was worth it, worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth loving. Not because she was perfect or special or extraordinary, but simply because she was human, and every human being deserved to be loved and cherished and told daily that they mattered. Garrett had seen that truth in her when she couldn't see it in herself, and through years of patient, persistent daily proof, he had taught her to believe it too. That was his greatest gift, greater even than the home and family and security he had given her. He had given her back herself, whole and healed, and finally able to accept love without fear. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, and the night grew deeper around them. But Grace and Garrett stayed on the porch a while longer, holding each other, secure in their love, at peace with the life they had built. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, side by side, the way they had for 20 years and would for however many more they were granted. Because Grace Zimmerman Whitmore had finally learned the most important lesson of all. She was worth everything, and she had found a man who would prove it daily for the rest of their lives. And that, in the end, was all that really mattered.